Ira G, and today we are at the Mansa World exhibition here in Labadi at the La Foundation of the Arts. And today we will be talking to the creator and playwright and Chief Creative Officer, Chief Moomen. And we're going to learn about his inspiration for the Mansa World project, the story of Mansa Musa, and everything else to come. So,
yes, Nakira,
welcome.
Thank you for having me. We've been planning this for a while now.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we finally get to talk.
I know, me too. So I just want to ask a couple questions about the inspiration and things like that. So why Mansa Musa? Why his story?
Well, I mean, you have to understand it within the context of what I do. I'm as a poet and a playwright, and my work revolves around African history and heritage. And so ever since I started writing, and whether as a performance poet on stage or as a playwright, writing script for stage, a lot of my themes have always been around, history and heritage, because it's important for people to reflect about their journey, who they are, to inform what they can do in the present and in the future. So Mansa Musa is just, one aspect of what I do. He's a character within a whole artistic journey that I have been on, in telling African stories, for the big stage, and soon enough for the big screen. And so why Mansa Musa? Just because why Mansa Musa? The question is that the answer should be why African history.
Yeah.
Why do I do African history? Because it's important, for the continent and for the rest of the world to appreciate, the complexity of our history and how we also contribute, to the world in a broader picture. So it will not be necessarily about Mansa Musa per se, but what I do with history and heritage.
Nice. And so most people, when they hear Mansa Musa, especially in the diaspora, most people only know
About
Mansa Musa's story about him being wealthy and him being the richest man in the world in history. But I noticed that the play didn't focus on that part.
Yeah.
Was that intentional?
Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, I don't think that scientifically that you could ever say one person, a particular person, is the wealthiest person to have ever lived. I don't think we have enough data to be able to ascertain. You could fairly say that he was one of the richest to have ever lived, right? So I don't necessarily believe he was the wealthiest person to have ever lived in all the history of humankind. Yes, he could be up there because he superintended over a lot of gold fields, which enriched him. But for me, really, the wealth goes beyond the material wealth. It was the intellectual wealth, it was the spiritual wealth, it was the cultural wealth. And he was at a point in time where there were a number of great, nations and empires. You talk about the Ghana Empire that, gave rise to the Mali Empire, if you like, and the Songhai Empire. So again, he's one of many Mansas who existed and who all, come together to tell this very important piece of West African history. So yes, the wealth is exciting, it's sensational, but beyond the wealth, there are many other stories and many other themes that we can exploit. We even question the idea of the wealth. So you remember in the play, some of the characters, when his story was being told, they said that if he was so wealthy and powerful, why are his people so poor and kind of like desperate now, right? So in a way, that's why we're doing this. We're trying to go back into our history to learn what went right, but also what went wrong. What can we learn from the history? What can we be inspired by to make our nations of today and tomorrow great and strong? So yes, it's not just about the material wealth. It's about all the wealth and all the, what we can glean from that story to inspire our progress as a race and as a people.
Intricacies of the play and everything, I want to learn a little bit more about you.
Yes.
So can you tell us where you're from and what languages you speak, and just a little bit of history of your hometown?
Well, I mean, I consider myself, and it's important that your show is titled Griot of the Diaspora. I actually consider myself as a descendant of a long line of storytellers, of griots. So I am part of that storytelling tradition where stories were the memory of the people, and that's how knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. I'm from northern Ghana, so I'm from a region in northern Ghana called the Upper West, from a town called Wa, and I speak a language called Wala. And we're part of the broader northern Sahelian ethnic groups. So my ancestry, I trace my ancestry back to ancient Mali. So most of us in northern Ghana today, when the empire of ancient Mali began to disintegrate, there was a lot of migration from, you know, the center, you know, towards the forest regions, you know, so my people migrated from, you know, that part of the Sahel, more towards the north, down towards the south. So most of us are part of that broader, you know, Mande, you know, kind of like ethnic group. My maternal grandfather actually migrated from Timbuktu and settled in a part of northern Ghana and got married and, you know, localized and you know, my mom was born through that line. So I am part of that kind of like long line of heritage, because we're all in a way we all come from way back. You know, our ancestry doesn't start 100 years or 400 years. It starts, you know, thousands of years back into the past, all the way into prehistory. So so currently though, I'm from northern Ghana, but part of the wider Sahelian West African cultures.
Nice. And so, so did you start your career as a poet?
Yes, actually. So I grew up in a very, well, I say bubbly household, you know. So my mom is a storyteller. I actually think that I do this because of the kind of upbringing I got. So I grew up in a typical northern African household, you know, so with aunties and cousins, siblings, and so there was never a dull moment within, you know, our household, and there was always stories and songs and laughter and fights, you know, the mosaic of human expression. But my mom particularly used to tell us a lot of stories, especially in the evenings or at dawn. After prayer, she would sit us down and tell us all kinds of stories, and that was her way of kind of like, you know, transferring knowledge, you know, and customs. And so when I was growing up, I always had a voice kind of like ringing in my mind. So it's quite interesting that when I started writing, you know, like I mean, I took to writing and storytelling, but also I discovered the craft of, if you like, I mean, spoken word very early. I saw a performance of Maya Angelou when I was very young, about 9 years or so. She had come, you know, she used to be in Ghana during our independence movement. She went back and came back, you know, like you. and so there's a big festival we do every year called Panafest, you know, Pan African Theatre Festival. And she had come and she was doing a performance at the National Theatre, and she was doing this, her famous poem, "You may write me down in history with your bitter twisted lies, but still like dust I rise." And I think that, well, I had an epiphany at that point. You know, I was awed by her aura, you know, her delivery. I probably didn't understand what she was saying until years later. And so that also crystallized that kind of art form in my mind. So growing up, you know, hearing my mom's stories and songs in that very bubbly environment and that communal environment, and now kind of like seeing this woman also take it a notch higher into this performance, you know, it just had an impression on me, and I just fall in love with the art of literature and writing and reading, and it became courses I studied in school, and that's how it began. So I started from poetry, you know, first writing to performing, and then before theater.
So what was your first play?
My first play was actually, my first major play, I think, was in 2012. So when I was back in school, I did English and theater arts.
Okay.
So in my final year, I actually wrote some school plays. So we did the year as a playwright, you did a one-act play. But my final year project was on one of the northern. It was a historical production titled Njewura Jakbaini. It's one of the major ethnic groups, you know, from northern Ghana, and so I traced kind of like his migratory journey into our current northern Ghana, and how he formed the community called the Gonjas, you know, and our current president from Ghana is actually from that part of the country and from that ethnic group. So that was my first major full work, you know, that was done. It was later on produced by some students, not me. But then afterwards, I got a commission to do a play on an important moment in Ghanaian history called the 1948 riot. So the ex-servicemen had gone to fight for the British Army in Second World War, and they had returned, and they were entitled to some emolument. The British government didn't pay them, and so they went on a demonstration, and some of them were shot, and they died, and it led to a whole riot. And these riots kind of like played an important role towards the activism that led to our independence struggle. So every year on the 28th of February, we commemorate what we call the 1948 riot, and we kind of like celebrate the heroes who died on that day. And so I was asked to put together a production, and I did a powerful production of almost not too dissimilar from what I do now. So we had the choir, the dancers, the storytellers, the actors, and, you know, it was about the team of 60. And the production went so well. That was in February 2012. And we did it again in 2013 and 2014. But when I did the first production in 2012, I was like, you know what? Why don't I just do something that encompasses the entire, as much as possible, expanse of Ghanaian history beyond just a moment in that history. So that's when the idea germinated, and I incubated it, and I started talking about it and writing proposals, and until I got some support in 2014. And so in 2015, we launched our first theater project called the Heritage Theater Series that focused on telling historical Ghanaian stories, from ancient to modern times. We did that from about 2015 all the way to about 2018. It was a huge production. These were epics, 150 cast and crew. And so it was a labor of love. But after 2018, we decided to go back to the drawing board to re-strategize and see how can we do this long term. And that's when the Mansa World was born, which we are now working on, which focuses on now not just Ghanaian stories, but broader African stories.
So you're saying this idea came in 2018?
Yes, so it was more or less like, it came from the Heritage Theater Series, what we started doing, from 2012 then into 2015. And then it just was built up from there.
So how long did it take to prepare for what you did this year?
So when we took a break sometime in 2018 from doing our productions because they were so just expensive, and it was so stressful trying to put all of these people and such a big vision. And the Ghanaian productions were as big as what you actually saw with the African productions. So from 2018, when I started engaging, traveling the world, pitching the idea, we didn't do any major production until 2022. So that was almost another 4 years later. And in all of that time, the concept was building, the storylines were building, and what you just saw is just the first of about 5 plays that focuses on ancient West Africa before we move on to other regions of Africa.
Let's talk a little bit more about the play.
Yes. Mansa Musa and the Trail of Lost Gold.
Yes. So in the beginning, there's a part where these 3 ghosts kind of welcome Mansa Musa on stage or into the city or the area that he was in. What was the symbolization behind that?
Yes, so they were more or less like they were accompanying the actual character. There is the Dogon sage. So that was the old sage who came to whisper something into Mansa Musa's ear. The play, we have this whole time travel dynamic. It's not just about the past, it's also about the present and into the future, right? And so they are more like our instrument of time travel. They are part of the instrument of time travel. We have the dancers, we have the camel, which is what transports them into the back. We have the xylophone. So we have a whole mechanism that we devised, artistically for our own time travel. And that sage is a character that we developed. I mean, he's a historical character in terms of the Dogon people of ancient Mali, who were like these very revered kind of people in touch with their customs and traditions, who had connections, who had traditional stories and symbolisms that connected into outer space and and all of that, right? So we use this Dogon sage character also as this kind of like time traveling character who understood some of the mysteries of life, and so they hold ancient knowledge and ancient secrets that they pass on to who they need to pass on to, right? So those 3 necessarily, the most important symbol was the Dogon sage, and then we had them as more or less like one of the instruments of our time travel, almost kind of like symbolizing this multipolar world, multidimensional world, if I may say, across time that their story, is related in, because that's Dogon sage. I mean, without giving too much away, came to make a prediction or whispered something into, Mansa Musa's ear that will have, some implications into the future. So that was a moment in which the past, the present, and the future kind of like converge at the very beginning of the play before they disintegrate into their various time frames.
Yeah. Okay. And so obviously one of the main characters of the play and as well as the exhibition is the wardrobe and the fashion and the fabric. What was the process like sourcing all of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's another area we're still quite working, So the project is still very much at its inception stage, but I mean, the costuming is always very important in theater, right? Not just about the relevance of that costuming, but also obviously the aesthetic of that costuming. And so we were dealing with a particular region of Africa that had a particular kind of, you know, look, and so that's what we tended to replicate. And what is very interesting, you know, back then, you know, we are talking about almost 800 years ago, was even how interconnected the world was in many ways. So the ancient West African rulers were wearing silk. And these silk came all the way from China, you know, via the Silk Road, and then came towards Cairo and then down through the Sahara into ancient Mali. So that also is very interesting dynamic. So you have these silk fabrics, you know, that form the cloak that these kings wear, but you also have the African woven fabrics, you know, which are a very important part of the fashion of the region, you know, whether if you are looking at the accounts, well, we have the Kentiba in the north, you know, we have the Fugu, but woven fabrics are very, very important to the culture, as well as the mat cloth, you know, which is also a very much important, you know, fabric that relates. So as much as possible, we try to mix these based on the characters we're looking at, and we even have almost modern, you know, Sahelian look with the bubus, you know. So we had the choir and the instrumentalists, you know, because they were permanent, you know, throughout. They form more or less like the visible, invisible griot on stage, because they also help advance the story through their music and through their instrumentation. So they were in these traditional bubus, and then the various characters, depending on what role they played, you know, were appropriately costumed. If they were the kings or the mansas, they were given this larger than life, you know, silk, you know, woven fabric, brocades, because these were the languages. You know, if they were ordinary folk, they probably had a piece of cloth just around themselves. So, you know, if they were clerics, you know, so we had a clerical look as well. They had the, you know, the bubu plus the mat cloth. So, but the costume is still another very exciting area that we're actually working on. And as we, you know, source for more resources, you know, one of the things we are improving a lot within the production, the accessories. You know, we haven't even touched a lot on the accessories, you know, and so we're trying to collect from different regions within, you know, West Africa, you know, the amulets, the bangles, you know, and all the kind of accessories that will add an extra layer, you know, to the costume. And then we have a great costume department as well.
Nice. And so what about the music? How was sourcing the instrumentalists? And, you know, there was a whole orchestra in the play. I think, you know, obviously the music is such a major part of it. Just having amazing singers and amazing storytelling. How was that process?
Well, it was, so these processes evolved over time. So what is important is that the team that I'm working with, the core team, especially of directors, essentially the core team I started my first projects with, you know, from 2012 into 2015. So I have people in my first production in 2012, you know, who are in this production. For example, the gentleman who arranges the traditional instruments, Alex, was on stage with me, you know, in 2012, right? Most of the directors came on board in 2015. You know, so we've been working together for over 10 years. And so the choir director, the music producer, the main director, the stage manager, you know, all of these guys have been part of the journey. And so we've developed a rhythm and an understanding, and then we have casting crew who have also been with us for that long. And so when it came to the casting, it wasn't very much difficult because we were building our team over time and throughout the years. Because I always knew that I was going to do this production, I was always looking out for characters. So in the play, the guy who plays Sumanguru, you know, the king of the Soso nation, for 3 years, I kept telling him that, look, I have a character for you. I have a character for you, because I needed someone who could give me that duality of menace, but, you know, I mean, it's menace but also fun. And, you know, he's a fun but menacing character, right? You know, he's hot and cold, you know, so I always needed that character who can give me that duality. And he's someone that I saw years ago. I mean, I knew him back when I was in school, you know, I always knew that he was a fantastic actor, and I always knew that I would want to work with him. And so when I started working on the Mansa Musa production, I was like, no, this is my character. So I told him for 3 years. And there's another guy that I've been talking to for 4 years to play another role of another Mansa Abubakar, whose story we haven't done, but I know the character who's going to play. So in terms of casting, that's what we did. In terms of the choice of music, it was pretty straightforward. It was a mixture of things, right? For example, the region that we're representing has to be represented in terms of the Sahelian sound, the kora, the xylophone. These are the two most primary instruments. So when it comes to our opening numbers, you know, all of these instruments are very much alive. But obviously, because it's also kind of like a modern production, we take advantage of modern musical instruments. But when you listen to them, there's always that African feel. But we have an eclectic mix, you know. We even have some operatic influences in some of the songs that we curate. And the songs actually came to me. If someone told me that I was going to be writing music for this production, I wouldn't have. I mean, I wouldn't have believed you, right? But as I started working on this scripts more, I started conceptualizing, because I knew I was writing a musical, there was a certain sound and there's a certain emotion that I wanted. There was a certain, you know, communication in terms of lyrics. So that the music just came to me. And then of course, I now think back, it's part of the way I told you how my mother used to sing for us, right? So at the very foundation, singing was very important to the way in which my mom told us the stories. And now music is very much important, you know, to what I do in terms of the production. So yeah, it's an eclectic mix, but very much also steeped in who we are and from the tradition whose story we are telling.
Nice. So what is the future of the Mansa World project?
So the Mansa World is an intergenerational project. So there are two things you need to know about the Mansa World. It's a world of multiple stories. So what we seek to do is to tell African stories, you know, from west to north, to east to south to central to the diaspora. We've only just started with the West African epics, and from there we moved into ancient Egypt, ancient Ethiopia, we'll come to Central Africa. So it's going to be an intergenerational project, and we're producing content across platforms. It's not just film, it's not just theater. We're going to do films, we're doing comics, we're doing animation. Already we have the theater, we have the orchestra, which focuses on the music. Now we're extending the world into this art exhibition in this gallery. So it's a world that's going to have different iterations, podcasts, games, comics, animation. So what we seek to do really is to become the biggest storytelling platform out of Africa, focusing on African stories for the continent and for the rest of the world.
Nice. And can you tell us a little bit about the UNESCO partnership?
Yes, so we've been working with UNESCO for a while now. So UNESCO has a project called the General History of Africa, which they started in the 70s. And the project was to bring together a number of scholars to put together a number of authoritative volumes on African history. And so they did a lot of work in kind of like putting together all of these voluminous work on literature on African history. And they've also been seeking to make that you know, research and publications available and accessible to a wide range of audience, and they recognize the role of how do you call it? They recognize the role of the performing arts, if you like, of arts, creative arts, you know, to reach to a wider audience. And so when we started engaging them, and they had invited me, you know, on a number of occasions, you know, to make presentations because of my earlier work in history and heritage. And then I started pitching the project to them, and they saw value in what we're trying to do in terms of creating all of these content, you know, on African history. And we're now also using their material, their literature as part of our source material. And so it's really a partnership that seeks to promote African history and heritage, also within educational institutions. And so we recently, when we did our show in March, we did an exclusive show just for school children, which was really wonderful. And so we're going to be doing a lot of joint projects together to promote our African history and heritage, you know, to the rest of the world.
Nice. And so since you did your January run and your March run, when can people expect to see the play this year?
So now we're working on a few international productions. So we're going to do a few things, you know, around the world. In Africa, we're going to go to Abuja. One of the things we're excited about is that we're most likely going to be in the Caribbean for one of their biggest festivals. The Prime Minister, Mia Motley, who has seen except of the production on some of our international tours, has invited us to stage a production at Carifesta. So we're very, very excited about that as well. We're going to be in North Africa as well for some major events. And we're looking to, right now the focus is to take the product to as many places in the world as possible, to build partnerships, to build awareness, and to open, you know, the pathway for us to bring more productions in. So for Accra, we're going to return most likely in December during the Christmas, New Year break period for a number of productions. We're going to do a new production. So right now we have Mansa Musa and the Trail of Lost God, the Prelude. we're going to go to the part 1. So we have the prelude part 1, part 2, part 3, and then we're even thinking of the epilogue as well at the very end. So it's going to be very exciting. But we'll have a new play. We'll run the first one, the prelude again, but we'll have a new play. We'll also have the orchestra also performing. We'll have an arts exhibition running in December. So in December in Accra, we're going to be very busy. But before then, we'll be taking the production on tour, both the orchestra and the theater production, to different places around the world.
Nice. Okay, and my last question, how can the diaspora support you, whether they're in Ghana or they are abroad? What are some of the things that you might be looking for in terms of support?
Well, I mean, we're building meaningful partnerships, and especially, for example, in as we're taking the production to the Caribbean, we're not taking the full team. We're taking about 60. We're going to work with about 40. So we have a formula where wherever we go, we work with a team on the ground, right? Because the story that we also tell is not just continental African story. You know, it's also the story of the African diaspora. The one thing that unites us as people on the continent and the diaspora is our shared history. And so in terms of support, we encourage anyone, whenever you hear that there's a Mansa World production coming to your city, please do well to come and see the production. They are quite fascinating. We're also exploring opportunities for partnerships to bring those productions, you know, to those cities. So we're quite excited about the prospects, and we're open to all kinds of collaborations and partnerships that are mutually beneficial and that will advance the cause of what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, that is it, guys. Till next time.
Do you want to learn any Ghanaian language online? Do you want to know more about your culture as a Ghanaian? Then we've got you covered at Ghana Lingo. We teach Fanti, Tree, Ga, Dangme, Ava, Dagmani, Ahanta, Gunja, and many more. What we teach: grammar and sentence structure, pronunciation and intonation, speaking and conversation skills, reading and writing, as well as cultural studies. We teach children, beginners and advanced learners, individuals and groups, and anyone passionate about Ghanaian languages. Our prices are cool and moderate. Contact us today on email at ghanalingo24@gmail.com, WhatsApp or call 055-659-5740. Our website is ghanalingo.com. Ghana Lingo. Experience the vibrant rhythm of Ghanaian languages and culture.